Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to share two techniques for creating faux stained glass on an old window. The first one, we're going to use an element from the Pennsylvania Folk stamp set by IOD, but I first needed to make a pattern. So I cut a piece of cardstock to the size of the glass of my panes. Mine happened to be 7.5 by 9.5. And then it was a lot of fuzzy math, but I used my score blade and folded my paper on the short and long side to get my center. And then I just kept working with it. I think Pinterest is a great resource for looking up stained glass patterns, just to give you some ideas. I knew I wanted to create a center medallion for that stamp. And so then, just so I would be able to see my lines and use this as a guide, I went ahead and filled in my score lines and my pattern with a pencil. This allows me to see underneath the glass, and you'll see that we're going to attach this to the window. Once I had those in place, I then wanted to complete my pattern. And so again, this was a lot of fuzzy math, but I used my score blade to kind of create even more pattern along the border. That outside pattern I knew I was going to allow to be kind of a frosted glass, but I wanted to add color in areas. And so I just kept working with it until I found something that I liked. I filled those lines in with pencils too. Again, you just want to make sure that you're able to see your pattern underneath the glass. Once all of those lines were in place, I used a StazOn ink in black, and I stamped that element from the Pennsylvania Folk stamp set in the center of my design. I wanted to add even a little bit more, so with a ruler, I went ahead and lined up and just kind of created some more areas for decoration. And now I have my pattern. So next, what I needed to do was attach that to the back of my glass, and I'm just using I hadn't decided on a color for my frame yet, so I used just regular blue painter's tape. If your frame is painted, I would recommend the yellow frog tape because it's made for delicate surfaces and won't pull the paint off your frame. Now it was time to create my lead lines. I'm using a product by Plaid. It's called Liquid Leading. I'm going to let you know that this was not the easiest to work with out of the bottle that it came in. And I even tried my go-to needle nose bottles, and that was hard. I did, however, after, of course, making this window, find a bottle that works really well with the liquid leading and makes it much easier. So I'm going to share that in the description. But for now, I just want you to see that I'm adding the liquid leading to my design, and you can see how filling in those score lines with pencil really helped. When I had areas that needed to be cleaned up, I used isopropyl alcohol on a precision tip Q-tip, and it was a little tedious. A stylus helped too, but I was able to clean up those lines. I filled in the center medallion, and it was really starting to come together. I was really excited to get to this part because the next step is coloring it in. Now it was time for color. I used IOD ink and diamond glaze and a small needle nose bottle. You'll need little steel balls. I'll link those in the description as well. I dropped 2 of these into the bottle. This is so that the mediums can mix together. And so I used the little funnel and filled this up with diamond glaze. And just this is going to be the medium that helps make the ink transparent. So this is turmeric, and I started with about, I think I ended up with 8 drops, but you could start with 4 to 8. And once that's in, you just put the lid back on, shake it up really, really well. It does take a little bit to mix, but once it is, then you get this beautiful transparent color. So I used turmeric, and then I also mixed turmeric and tomato to make an orange. I used the Ocean's Deep for the blue and Newgrass for the green. And now we were ready to color. Once my window was all done, I had photocopied the pattern and used some colored pencils to kind of give me my color pattern. And once I had that in place, I then started filling in between the lead lines each of the colors that matched my pattern. So this took a little while, but I think this was the most enjoyable part of the project because it was really starting to come together and looking like stained glass. I did one color at a time and just used my pattern to help guide me as I completed this. I started with the center medallion, and then I went into the color on the border. I really do recommend creating a color pattern because it helps guide you in this. Once this part was done, I wanted to use some glass bead gel. It is supposed to dry clear, and then you get these beautiful little beads, and I just thought that would be a pretty effect. I decided that I was going to go apply the bead gel on every other area of this center border around the medallion between the color, and then I'll be using another product that gives a frosted glass technique on the other areas. But something happened, and I thought this project was a total fail, but I did figure it out. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Once I got the bead glass on, then I applied the Gallery Glass Clear, which also gives a frosted glass appearance, and I just thought it would be a nice contrast and interest for the window. I'm just using a small paintbrush to do this and spread it out. So here's what happened. It was, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I only did one pane, because when I woke up the next morning, oh my goodness, this is what I saw. Wait for it. Ugh. The bead gel was applied too heavily and just was left just a big white glob of mess. So what I did was I mixed some of my bead gel into my diamond glaze. I first had to use an X-Acto knife to remove those areas, and then just with a paintbrush I stippled it in, and I think it was worth it. In the end, I think it turned out beautifully. Let me know what you think. So for this next window, I wanted to use the beautiful Carmen's Color Swatch decoupage paper, but I also knew that I wanted to make it more transparent like glass, so I wanted to reduce the opacity. To do that, I cut several pieces and I mixed up equal parts of a clear resin. You can see in the picture the resin I'm using, and I'll link to it. Once my resin was mixed, I put my decoupage paper onto a wax paper covered cookie sheet, and then I used a silicone spatula to spread the resin. This does take several hours to dry, but that's okay. I went ahead and did this, and then I worked on the frame, which you'll see. So I only did this on one side of the paper, and then I let it sit overnight, and you'll see that once this is all dry and set, you get the most beautiful resin paper. It's like glassine. It's very transparent and beautiful. So you can see here that it's no longer opaque, and you can see through it, which is exactly what I wanted. Once that was done, I let that dry and decided to work on the frame. And I decided that I was going to do a Prussian blue frame, but I wanted other colors underneath. So this is a salt wash paint technique. I'm mixing up Joshua Tree and Fireside by Wiesel Paint. mixing the salt wash in until it becomes kind of a thick kind of icing consistency. And then to apply that to my frame, I'm using a 1-inch round flat topped brush. It's a round brush, but the tip is flat. And so you'll see I'm using a card to spare me the scraping that I was going to have to do anyway, but I wanted to just be as neat as possible as I was doing this. So I used this card and my brush as a guide, and I applied the colors on there. So now I'm doing a full coat coverage of Prussian Blue, also by Wise Owl. This is the chalk synthesis paint that I'm using. And once that is dry, I'm able to sand back. I did use a small brush to go in, and now you can see this is when all of those other colors come through. Once everything was dry, I'm sealing it with Wise Owl's 1 Hour Enamel in clear coat in a matte sheen. I needed a pattern for this one, and this one I didn't use my scoring board. Instead, I used this little drawing ruler. And I wanted a diamond shape in the center for this window, and then a border of color. Initially, I thought I was just going to cover each pane fully in the resin paper, the Carmen's Color Swatch, but instead I decided to do a design. And so it was a little tricky. I turned that thing around a lot, but I got there. So my first step then was to take my resin paper, and I wanted to create my diamonds that were going to go in the center of the window. And that was pretty easy to do. The little squares in the paper pattern make it also easy, and so does this little ruler. I also cut several strips of each of the colors, and while I didn't get that part on the video, you'll see those strips in just a few minutes. Once all my diamonds were cut, this is where I kind of measured and thought, how many squares do I need? And I photocopied the pattern, and I went ahead and inked the edges so that the photocopier would get the whole design, and it would just make it easier for me to cut the shapes that I needed. Once those were all cut, here I am using that yellow frog tape for delicate surfaces so it doesn't pull my paint. You can see that I also finished off the back of the frame as well. And this time I just thought, well, I might as well just get the whole pattern there. So you want to keep isopropyl alcohol nearby, because if you get any medium on anything, it's just super easy to clean everything up. So here what I'm doing is I mixed a little bit of my diamond glaze and water to adhere my decoupage or my resin paper to the window. I cleaned up as I went, and I just took one of the window panes at a time. And once that was done and all of the diamonds were in place, then it was time to kind of lay out my strips that you can see there on the left. I just played with these and kind of until I was happy with the color, just laid out the strips. They weren't cut to size yet. I really just kind of wanted to get a sense of where they were going to go for each pane. And once that was done, then it was time to trim and cut and fit into place. And so this did take a little bit of time, but I really, really love how that turned out. I used that same decoupage medium, the mixture of water and diamond glaze, as the adhesive. It worked really well. The nice thing about it is it doesn't cure super quickly. And so I made a mistake on that first strip that I laid down. I put it too tall. I realized that maybe doing my longer strips would be better, and I didn't want it to go all the way down. So it was easy to pick that back up and wipe it off with the isopropyl alcohol and then put that back in place. Now it was time for leading, and so I really love this product. This is a leading by Pebeo, and it's called Sarin Relief. and I'll link that into the description. I love the pale gold color. It was super easy to squeeze. And so I really enjoyed using this product. It also feels more like a real lead, whereas the leading that I used in the previous window did feel a little sticky. Once that was all done, I just went back to that clear gallery glass and I filled in all of the other areas with that medium. I recommend using like a fine tip brush for this, and that's really helpful. I'm also going to show you where I used a little bit of a glue spreader, and that was helpful too to work with this. The colors that I'm filling in are just giving it a glass effect with diamond glaze. So this is diamond glaze mixed with nothing else. Diamond glaze is a dimensional adhesive, and it does give that underglass effect. Here I'm just pouring some in and using my glue spreader. This helps the medium from going over your lead lines. Once that was all done, I think it really does look like a beautiful stained glass window. This was so much fun. Let me know if you would try this and which window is your favorite. Thank you so much for joining me. If you liked this video, I hope you'll subscribe and share, and I look forward to creating with you again. Take care.